My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 72 years old, and my own son and his wife screamed at me to get out of the home I built with my late husband. Before I tell you how this led to them facing a judge and losing everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. For 40 years I taught American history. I taught students about resilience, about standing up for what's right, about the quiet strength that builds a nation. But no textbook, no lesson plan could have ever prepared me for the war I was about to fight in my own front yard. The 3-hour drive up into the Blue Ridge Mountains was usually my therapy. Every curve in the road felt like shedding a layer of city noise. Every new pine tree that came into view was a welcome friend. I was heading to Serenity Point, the lake cabin my late husband, Robert, and I built with our own hands. It was more than wood and nails, it was our legacy. I was going up to get the garden ready, to turn the soil and plant the heirloom tomatoes that Robert had loved so much. It was a ritual that kept his memory alive. But when I turned onto the final gravel path, my heart sank. There were 3 enormous, unfamiliar SUVs parked haphazardly across the entrance, blocking my way. My carefully tended lawn, the one I paid a local boy to mow every 2 weeks, was scarred with deep tire tracks. And the music? It wasn't the gentle sound of the wind through the pines. It was a thumping, angry rock music so loud it felt like a physical assault. I parked my old sedan on the shoulder and walked toward the cabin, a knot tightening in my stomach. The porch swing Robert had built was draped with wet towels. My prize-winning rose bushes were crushed, and an empty beer bottle lay on its side in my birdbath. The front door flew open and my daughter-in-law, Jessica, stepped out. She was wearing my favorite gardening apron, the one with the embroidered bluebirds. She wasn't surprised to see me. There was no flicker of shame in her eyes, only a cold, hard annoyance. Behind her, I could see her sister and her mother, faces I hadn't seen in years, peering out from the living room. A couple of teenage boys I didn't recognize were tossing a football, their laughter grating on my ears. Before I could even say hello, Jessica planted her hands on her hips. Her voice cut through the music, sharp and cruel. "What is this old woman doing here?" she shouted, not to me, but to the others on the porch. The question hung in the air, thick and ugly. Then she turned her glare on me. "We don't have room for freeloaders." The word freeloader struck me like a slap. In my own home. A home where every single floorboard held a memory. Where every window had been placed by my husband's hands. I looked past her, searching for the one face that mattered. And there he was. My son. My Mark. He stood in the doorway behind his wife, a shadow in his own home. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders were slumped, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He just stood there silent. And his silence in that moment was the most profound betrayal of all. It screamed louder than his wife's insults. It told me everything I needed to know. What is all this, Mark?" My voice was a weak whisper. Jessica laughed, a short, barking sound. "Oh, don't bother him. Mark told us we could use the cabin whenever we wanted. It's practically his inheritance anyway, right? We're a family. We need the space for the kids to get out of the city. You just come up here to poke around in the dirt and complain." She took a step toward me, her face a mask of contempt. "Frankly, Eleanor, there's no room for you here this weekend. Or any weekend for that matter. We're here. So you can just turn around and go back to wherever you came from." My keys felt heavy and cold in my hand. The laughter from her family echoed behind her. They were watching me, waiting for me to crumble, to cry, to scurry away like a frightened animal. I looked at the smug, triumphant smile on my daughter-in-law's face. Then my gaze fell on my son Mark, still hiding in the shadows, refusing to defend me, refusing to even look at me. I opened my mouth to plead with him, to ask him how he could let this happen, how he could forget everything we were. But the words that came out were not what he or anyone expected. I turned my old sedan around, the crunch of the gravel under my tires sounding like a final grinding goodbye. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, too cold for tears. It was a numbness that spread from my chest all the way to my fingertips. My son. My Mark. He had just stood there. I drove until I saw the flickering neon sign of a place called the Pinecone Motel. The name was far grander than the reality. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. The bedspread was a faded, scratchy floral pattern that had probably been there since the 80s. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest, and stared at the peeling paint on the wall. And in that dingy, lonely room, the memories came flooding back. I wasn't seeing the stained carpet. I was seeing the bare subfloor of Serenity Point 30 years ago. I saw Robert, my Robert, his face beaded with sweat, a pencil tucked behind his ear, laughing as he measured a beam. He wasn't just a carpenter. He was an artist, and that cabin was his masterpiece. We'd saved for a decade for that piece of land. A small slice of heaven on the lake. We weren't rich. He worked at the mill and I was a history teacher. Every extra dollar went into our cabin fund. We built it ourselves weekend after weekend, year after year. I remembered learning how to use a power saw, the satisfying bite of the blade through fresh pine. I remembered holding the ladder steady for Robert as he nailed the last shingle on the roof, the two of us sitting up there afterward, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and purple. This wasn't just a house. It was a testament to our life together. It was where we taught Mark how to skip stones across the water, his little face a perfect picture of concentration. It was where we'd sit on the porch during summer thunderstorms, counting the seconds between the lightning and the thunder. I could still feel the phantom weight of Mark's head on my lap as a little boy, fast asleep while Robert read aloud from a book of adventure stories. One crisp autumn afternoon, when Mark was about 15, he and I were raking leaves. He stopped, leaned on his rake, and looked at the cabin, his eyes full of a quiet awe that only a teenager can have. "You know, Mom," he'd said, his voice serious, "one day when I have a family and a promotion at work, I'm going to bring my kids here. I'm going to tell them all about how Grandpa Robert and Grandma Ellie built this paradise with their own hands." That memory, once a source of such warmth, now felt like a shard of ice in my heart. A paradise he was now giving away to the woman who had just called his mother a freeloader. Where did that boy go? The one with the earnest eyes and the heart full of promises? Was he still in there, buried under the weight of his wife's ambition and his own weakness? The pain wasn't about the property. It wasn't about the monetary value. It was about the erasure. Jessica wasn't just taking over a building. She was trying to overwrite my history, our history. She was trampling on the sacred ground of my memories with Robert, and Mark was letting her. He was holding the gate open. I thought about the last few years. The subtle shifts. The way Jessica would talk about the cabin not as your mom's place, but as the lake house. The way she'd suggest updates, tearing down Robert's handcrafted bookshelves to make an open concept space. The way Mark's phone calls became shorter, more distant. I had dismissed it all as the natural course of life. A son building his own family, his own world. I never imagined it was a quiet, calculated siege. Lying back on that lumpy motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, a different feeling began to replace the numb shock. It was a slow burning ember deep in my gut. They thought I was a relic. A sweet, harmless old widow who would just fade away. They had forgotten who I was. I was the daughter of a farmer who survived the Dust Bowl. I was the wife of a man who built things to last. And I was a history teacher. I knew all about unjust invasions and the wars fought for independence. And in the cold, sterile silence of that motel room, I knew I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the memory of the man I loved, and for the son I thought I knew. The sun rose the next morning, but it brought no warmth. I hadn't slept. I just replayed that scene at the cabin over and over in my head. Jessica's sneer. The laughter. Mark's silence. But morning brought clarity. A history teacher knows that the first response to an attack can't be purely emotional. It has to be strategic. I had to try one last time to reach my son, to see if there was anything left of the boy I raised. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath and dialed his number. It rang 4 times and I was about to hang up when he finally answered. "Mom." His voice was strained, guarded. "Mark, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." There was a long pause. I could hear Jessica's voice faintly in the background, sharp and demanding. "What is there to talk about?" he finally said, his tone flat. "Jessica." She gets a little worked up. "We just need some space, that's all. The whole family is here." "Space? Mark, she threw me out of my own home. She called me a freeloader. And you just stood there." My voice trembled, but I held it together. "Look, it's complicated," he stammered. "Jessica's been under a lot of pressure at her job. We've been worried about money, about the kids' college fund. She just wants a place where we can all relax. Relax? By kicking me out? Robert and I built that home for our family. For you. Not for you to hand it over to strangers who disrespect his memory. They're not strangers, they're Jessica's family, he snapped, a flicker of his wife's anger in his voice. Look, I can't do this right now. Just give us the weekend. Let us have this. We'll talk later. And he hung up. I just stared at the wall, the phone feeling heavy and dead in my hand. He'd made his choice. He called it complicated. I called it cowardice. The hope I'd been clinging to, that tiny ember, flickered and died. It was a punch to the gut, knowing your own child would choose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. But the worst was yet to come. A few minutes later my phone buzzed. It was a text message. Not from Mark, but from a number I didn't have saved, though I knew exactly who it was. The message was short and brutal. Stop bothering my husband, Eleanor. He has enough on his plate without you adding to it. If you show up here again, we will call the sheriff for trespassing. Enjoy the motel. I read it once. Then twice. Trespassing. She was threatening to have me arrested if I set foot on my own land. The land Robert and I had poured our life savings and our souls into. The sheer audacity of it, the cold-blooded cruelty, took my breath away. This wasn't just a grab for a vacation spot anymore. This was a hostile takeover. They weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to legally bar me from my own life. For anyone watching who's ever been made to feel like a stranger by your own family, you know that feeling in the pit of your stomach. That hollowed-out shock where you wonder if you ever knew them at all. Stick with me, because this is where a history teacher decides to teach one last unforgettable lesson. The text message was a mistake on her part. Huge one. It was no longer just her word against mine. It was evidence. Cold, hard, digital evidence of her intent. She thought she was scaring me off, but all she did was hand me my first weapon. I took a screenshot of the message. I saved it. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old, worn leather address book I keep in my purse, the one with Robert's familiar handwriting still on some of the pages. I wasn't looking for a friend or a family member. I was looking for a fighter. And I knew just who to call. But first I had to go back to the cabin. I told myself it was to get my heart medication and some clothes, but that was only half the truth. The other half? I needed to see the battlefield with my own eyes. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. A trespassing charge? On my own property? That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. Driving back to the cabin felt different this time. The anger was still there, a hot coil in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a cold, clear purpose. I was no longer a mother hoping for an explanation. I was a homeowner gathering intelligence. I parked on the road again and walked up the gravel path. Jessica met me at the door, her arms crossed, a look of smug irritation on her face. I thought I made myself clear, she said. I need my heart medication from the bathroom cabinet, Jessica, I said, my voice steady and calm. And a change of clothes. Unless you want to explain to a 911 operator why your mother-in-law had a cardiac event at the Pinecone Motel. Her eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she snapped. And don't touch anything. The inside of the cabin was a disaster. It was worse than I could have imagined from the porch. A half-eaten pizza sat on the coffee table Robert had built from a fallen oak tree. The beautiful braided rug my best friend had made for us as a housewarming gift was covered in muddy footprints. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and some cloying sweet perfume. It was a desecration. I walked past the living room, ignoring the glares from Jessica's sister, and went down the hall. My first stop was the small utility closet that led to the back workshop. I called it a closet, but it was really Robert's sanctuary. I opened the door and my heart stopped. It was empty. The shelves he had built were still there, but they were bare. His antique hand planes, the chisels he sharpened every Sunday, the beautiful walnut toolbox he'd had since he was a boy, all of it gone. I turned, my voice shaking with a rage I couldn't control. Jessica, where are Robert's tools? She sauntered down the hall, chewing on a piece of gum. She glanced into the empty workshop with a dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, that old junk? It was just collecting dust. My brother David is really into woodworking, so I gave it all to him. At least he can actually make use of it. Make use of it. The words echoed in the silent hallway. She hadn't sold them. She had given them away. A gift. My husband's legacy, his passion, his very essence, treated like a pile of scrap wood and handed over as a party favor. It felt like she had reached into my chest and ripped out a piece of my heart. That was a calculated cruelty, designed to wound me in the deepest way possible. I felt dizzy. I had to get out of her sight before I did something I'd regret. I pushed past her and went up the small flight of stairs to our bedroom, the room that had always been my quiet refuge. It was unrecognizable. Someone else's clothes were thrown over the rocking chair where I used to sit and read. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted. And then I saw it. Under the bed, a floorboard was slightly askew. It was the loose board Robert and I had always used as our secret hiding spot, a place no one else knew about. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt, my old knees protesting, and pried the board up. My hands trembled as I looked into the empty space. The small velvet pouch that held my mother's pearl necklace and earrings was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. What I found tossed aside in the corner of the dusty cavity, half hidden under an old blanket, made my blood run cold. It was a thick manila folder. Not mine. It had a cheap, plastic label on the tab with a name typed on it. Vance Eleanor Guardianship. My fingers felt numb as I pulled it out. My mind couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Guardianship. That was a legal term. It was what you did for people who couldn't take care of themselves. People who were incapacitated. I opened the folder. The top page was a legal document, a petition to the county court. I scanned the typed words and my vision started to swim. It was a formal request to appoint a legal guardian for me, Eleanor Vance. It cited my declining cognitive state, my inability to manage financial affairs, and my increasing paranoia. Paranoia. They were twisting my love for my home into a symptom of madness. And the petitioners? The ones asking the court to strip me of my rights? Mark Vance and his wife Jessica Vance. My son. His name was right there in cold black ink. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to brace myself against the bed frame. This was so much worse than a simple greedy grab for a vacation home. This was a meticulous, premeditated plan to have me declared legally incompetent. To erase me. I kept reading, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Tucked behind the petition was what looked like a medical evaluation. It was on the letterhead of a Dr. Alistair Finch, a name I had never heard in my life. The report was a work of fiction. It claimed I suffered from early-onset dementia. It listed symptoms I didn't have. Memory loss, confusion, erratic behavior. It was a character assassination disguised as a medical diagnosis. The doctor concluded that I was a danger to myself and my own financial well-being. The document was signed, dated just 2 weeks prior. They had been planning this for a while. But the final pages were the real gut punch. There was a professional appraisal of the Serenity Point property. The number at the bottom made me gasp. $850,000. They knew exactly what it was worth. And behind the appraisal, there were printouts from a real estate website. Listings for sprawling modern condos in the city, the kind with rooftop pools and concierge services. The kind Jessica always dreamed about. They weren't just trying to get a free place to stay. They were trying to liquidate my life. They planned to sell my home, Robert's home, and use the money to fund their luxury lifestyle. They were going to use a forged medical document to convince a judge I was insane, take control of everything I owned, and then throw me into whatever state-run facility would take me while they drank cocktails on their new balcony. The sheer diabolical evil of it was breathtaking. This was a level of betrayal I couldn't have imagined in my darkest nightmares. My training as a history teacher kicked in. Document everything. Preserve the evidence. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my phone, but I managed. I took clear, focused pictures of every single page. The petition with Mark's name on it. The fraudulent medical report. The appraisal. The condo listings. Each photo was another nail in their coffin. They thought I was frail. They thought I was confused. They thought I was a sentimental old fool who could be easily manipulated. They had made a fatal mistake. They mistook age for weakness. I placed the folder back exactly where I found it, under the loose floorboard. I walked out of that bedroom a different woman than the one who had walked in. The hurt was still there. A deep aching wound, but it was now encased in a shell of ice-cold resolve. I walked down the stairs past Jessica, who was tapping impatiently on her phone. I didn't say a word. I just walked out the door, got in my car and drove. But I didn't go back to the motel. I didn't go home. I drove an hour and a half in the opposite direction, to a small quiet town where Robert and I had opened our first bank account together. I walked into the familiar, hushed lobby of the community bank and asked to see the manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Abernathy whom I'd known for years. He ushered me into his office, concern on his face. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" I sat down, my purse in my lap, and took a deep breath. "David," I began, "I need to tell you something Robert made me promise to keep secret for 30 years. I told him about my husband. Everyone knew Robert Vance as a humble, hard-working carpenter from the mill, a man who was good with his hands. But almost no one knew the other side of him. Robert wasn't just a craftsman. He was a quiet, brilliant observer of the world. In the late 80s, long before it was fashionable, he started reading books about investing. He never trusted the stock market gurus on TV. He trusted numbers, patterns, and patience. He started with a few $100s, I explained to Mr. Abernathy. He invested in companies nobody had heard of back then. A small software company in Seattle, a little online bookstore. He treated it like his garden, tending to it, nurturing it, rarely taking anything out. He used to say, "Ellie, this is our safety net. Not for a new car or a fancy vacation. This is for a real storm." My voice cracked. Before he passed, he made me promise. He said, "Don't ever tell Mark about this. A man needs to make his own way. And don't you touch it either, unless you find yourself fighting for your life." David, I think that day has come. Mr. Abernathy listened, his expression shifting from concern to quiet astonishment. He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He typed in codes and passwords that accessed accounts I hadn't looked at in years. Then he turned the monitor toward me. I leaned forward, and for the first time in days, a slow, grim smile spread across my face. It wasn't a small nest egg. It was a dragon's hoard. Through decades of quiet, disciplined investing and the magic of compounding interest, Robert's small safety net had grown into a fortune. The number at the bottom of the screen was staggering. Over $2.5 million. This wasn't a plot twist from a movie. This wasn't a lucky lottery ticket. This was the final gift from the man I loved. A gift of security, of independence, of power. It was the result of his foresight, his quiet genius, and his deep, abiding love for me. He had been protecting me even from beyond the grave. Jessica and Mark were fighting a dirty, desperate battle for a house worth $850,000. They were willing to commit fraud, to destroy my reputation, to steal my inheritance, all for that sum. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who could buy and sell them 10 times over. The game had just changed. And they were about to find out they weren't just playing against a retired history teacher. They were playing against the legacy of Robert Vance. I left the bank feeling like a general preparing for battle. The first thing I did was ask Mr. Abernathy to print out a certified statement of my accounts, along with a formal letter from the bank attesting to the fact that I, Eleanor Vance, had been solely and competently managing these complex financial assets for years. It was the perfect counter-narrative to their lies about my declining cognitive state. My next call was from the parking lot. I didn't look for a cheap local lawyer. I looked for a titan. Robert's final gift wasn't meant for half measures. I found her online. Catherine Albright, a senior partner at a top Charlotte law firm, renowned for her take-no-prisoners approach in elder abuse and financial fraud cases. Her consultation fee alone was probably more than Mark's monthly salary, and I didn't even blink. Her secretary tried to schedule me for an appointment in 2 weeks. "Please tell Ms. Albright," I said, my voice firm and clear, "that I have irrefutable photographic evidence of felony-level fraud being committed against me by my son, and I also have a certified financial statement showing a net worth in the high 7 figures to fund the ensuing litigation. I am available this afternoon." I got a call back in 5 minutes. Ms. Albright would see me at 4 p.m. I walked into her polished, intimidating office with a folder containing everything: the photos of the guardianship petition and the fake medical report, the screenshot of Jessica's threatening text, a list of the stolen items, especially Robert's tools, and the certified letter from my bank. Catherine Albright was exactly what I'd hoped for. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't offer condolences or platitudes. She listened. She examined every piece of evidence in silence, her expression growing more grim with each page. When I finished, she looked up from the photos on her desk, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional detachment in her eyes. It was cold fury. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice like steel. "This is not a family squabble. This is a criminal conspiracy. The guardianship petition is fraud. The medical report is forgery. The stolen items constitute theft. The text message is attempted intimidation. They haven't just been disrespectful. They have committed multiple felonies." She leaned forward, mapping out the strategy. "We will launch a three-pronged attack. First, tomorrow morning, I will file for an emergency ex parte restraining order and eviction notice. We'll have them out of your house by noon. Second, we file a civil suit for damages, for the stolen property, emotional distress, and punitive damages so high it will make their eyes water. And third, and this is the most important part, we are taking this entire file to the district attorney's office. Your son and his wife aren't just going to lose the house. They are going to face criminal charges." Before I left, I made one more call. To my next-door neighbor at the lake, George. George wasn't just a neighbor. He was a retired police chief, a man with a backbone of solid oak and a deep respect for Robert. I told him what had happened. "Eleanor, I saw it," he said, his voice rumbling with anger. "I saw that woman yelling at you in your own driveway. I was about to walk over, but you handled yourself with such dignity I didn't want to interfere. You just say the word. I'll give a sworn statement about your character, your clarity of mind, anything you need." I hung up the phone. I had my evidence. I had my financial power. I had the best lawyer in the state. And I had allies. As I left Ms. Albright's office, I felt the spine of the history teacher I once was straighten. I had spent my life teaching about battles and strategies. Now it was time to fight my own. The next morning arrived, crisp and clear. At precisely 10 a.m., a small convoy pulled onto the gravel path leading to Serenity Point. At the front was a county sheriff's car, followed by Ms. Albright's sleek black sedan. I was in the passenger seat. The scene on the porch was one of lazy entitlement. Jessica was lounging on the swing with a magazine, her sister was on the phone, and the teenage boys were tossing a water balloon back and forth over my ravaged rose bushes. The party was in full swing. It came to a screeching halt when the sheriff, a large, imposing man with a serious face, stepped out of his vehicle. Jessica shot to her feet, her face a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. The sheriff didn't smile. "Ma'am, I have a court order here for the immediate eviction of all unauthorized persons from this property." He handed her the papers. Jessica's face went white as she scanned the document. "What? This is ridiculous. This is my husband's house. It's our family home." Ms. Albright stepped forward, all business. "Actually, Ms. Vance, it is not," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "The property is, and always has been, in the sole name of Eleanor Vance. You are trespassing. The order gives you and your family exactly 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Jessica's sister started yelling about their rights. Her brother-in-law came storming out of the house demanding to know what was going on. It was chaos. In the middle of it all, another car came speeding up the path. It was Mark. Someone must have called him. He jumped out of his car, his face pale and sweating. "What's happening? What is all this?" he demanded, looking from the sheriff to me. The sheriff handed him his own set of papers. "Mr. Vance," he said grimly, "you're being served. This is a summons to appear in court to answer to a civil complaint. And I'd advise you to get a good lawyer." Mark looked at the papers, his jaw dropping. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, panicked plea. "Mom? A lawsuit? What are you doing?" I stepped out of the car and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. The whole chaotic scene seemed to fade into the background. It was just him and me. "A misunderstanding, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, echoing the words he'd used on the phone. "Was it a misunderstanding when you stood by and watched your wife call me a freeloader in my own home? Was it a misunderstanding when you conspired with her to forge a medical document? Was it a misunderstanding when you signed a petition to have me declared insane, so you could sell my home and steal my inheritance? Every word was a hammer blow. He flinched with each question. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. Jessica rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. Don't listen to her, Mark. Tell them she's confused. She's making it all up. But the fight had gone out of him. He just stared at me, the full weight of his betrayal finally crashing down on him. He wasn't just losing a house. He was losing his soul, right there in the gravel driveway where he'd once learned to ride a bike. Watching them scramble to pack their bags, their little empire of greed crumbling around them, was a sight I'll never forget. The sheriff's deputies stood by impassive as they threw clothes into trash bags and loaded coolers into their SUVs. Their loud, boisterous party had turned into a frantic, humiliating retreat. But this was far from over. This was just the eviction. The real justice was yet to come. Keep watching. The days following the eviction were a whirlwind of legal activity. Ms. Albright was a force of nature. She filed the civil suit, and as promised, she delivered the entire evidence file to the district attorney's office. The wheels of justice, it turned out, could move very quickly when lubricated with a substantial legal budget. The fallout was swift and devastating for them. The first domino to fall was Dr. Alastair Finch. The DA's investigators, armed with my evidence, paid him a visit. It turned out he had a history of providing evaluations for cash. Faced with the threat of prison time for felony fraud and medical malpractice, he cracked. He gave a full confession, admitting he'd been paid $10,000 in cash by Jessica to create the fake report without ever having met me. The state medical board summarily suspended his license, and he was facing his own criminal indictment. The next domino was Mark. His employer, a large architectural firm, got wind of the lawsuit and the impending criminal investigation. An internal ethics committee was convened. He was suspended from his job without pay, pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. The promotion he'd been chasing for years vanished overnight. His career was in free fall. Then the phone calls started. First, it was Jessica's sister, Veronica. Her voice, once so full of mockery, was now thick with panic tears. Eleanor, you have to stop this. You're ruining their lives. Jessica is a wreck. Think of the children. Their friends at school are going to find out. Please call off your lawyer. I let her finish, my silence amplifying her desperation. Veronica, I said finally, my voice calm and even. I am thinking of the children. I'm teaching them a valuable lesson. I'm teaching them that actions have consequences. I'm teaching them that you do not prey on the elderly, you do not steal, and you do not betray the people who love you. That is a far more important lesson than what their friends at school think. I hung up. A few days later, Jessica herself showed up at the Pinecone Motel. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled. She was holding a dusty cloth bag. She didn't try to make excuses. She just stood there, defeated. Here, she whispered, holding out the bag. It's your mother's jewelry, and the silver dollars from Robert's collection. I took the bag without a word. I am so sorry, Eleanor, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. We were in so much debt. Mark's salary wasn't enough. The credit cards were maxed out. I was desperate. I never wanted it to go this far. I looked at her and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast emptiness. Her apology wasn't for the pain she had caused me. It wasn't for disrespecting my husband's memory or trying to steal my life. It was for getting caught. Her tears were for herself, for the comfortable life that was now slipping through her fingers. She cried, but I saw no real remorse in her eyes. Only the tears of someone who got caught. I took back my mother's jewelry, and then I closed the door. With the invaders gone, I moved back into Serenity Point. The first few days were surreal. The silence was deafening. The house felt violated, tainted by their presence. I hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub the place from top to bottom, to exorcise the ghosts of their greed. They steam-cleaned the carpets, polished the floors, and washed every wall. I threw open all the windows, letting the clean mountain air chase out the last lingering scent of their cheap perfume and stale lies. Slowly, I began to reclaim my home. I bought a new rug to replace the one they'd ruined. I spent a whole afternoon polishing the coffee table Robert had made, gently working away the water rings their careless glasses had left behind. Each act of restoration was an act of healing. About a week after I moved back in, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the address written in Mark's familiar, slanting handwriting. My hand trembled as I opened it. It was a long letter, 4 pages filled with anguish and self-loathing. He wrote about the mountain of debt they had hidden from me, about the pressure he felt to give Jessica and the kids the life they wanted. He confessed that Jessica had come up with the entire plan, from the fake medical report to the guardianship petition. He wrote that he knew it was wrong, but he was weak, and he was scared of losing her. He said he felt like he was drowning and had grabbed onto the lifeline she'd thrown him, without thinking about who he was pulling under with him. I have failed you as a son, he wrote at the end. I have failed Dad's memory. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, maybe not ever. But I needed you to know the truth. I am so sorry. He was asking for a chance to talk. A chance to somehow, someday, begin to make it right. I read the letter twice. I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. And I didn't answer it. What could I say? That I understood? I didn't. That I forgave him? I couldn't. Not yet. His apology was for his actions, but he couldn't undo the fundamental betrayal. His silence. He had stood there and watched. He had made a choice. Love for a mother is supposed to be unconditional, but trust is not. Trust, once shattered, can't be glued back together with a 4-page letter. So I answered with silence. My silence was not about punishment. It was about peace. I needed to heal, and I couldn't do that with his apologies and excuses ringing in my ears. I needed to find my own center again, away from the wreckage he had created. I started working in the garden, my hands in the rich, dark soil. I pulled weeds with a vengeance, each one a small act of reclaiming my territory. I planted the heirloom tomato seedlings, just as I'd planned. As I worked under the warm sun, feeling the familiar ache in my back, I realized something. Some wounds are too deep to be healed with words. As I swept the last of the dust from my home, I realized I wasn't just cleaning a house. I was cleansing my life. The day of the criminal hearing arrived on a cold, gray morning in November. I walked into the courthouse not with a thirst for revenge, but with a need for closure. I wore a simple navy blue suit, my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I had recovered, my only adornment. I was calm. I was ready. Jessica and Mark sat at the defendant's table with their court-appointed lawyer. They looked like strangers, haggard, diminished, stripped of their arrogance. Jessica stared at her hands, avoiding my gaze. Mark, however, looked at me. His eyes were filled with a shame so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. The proceedings were methodical, clinical. The assistant district attorney laid out the case with brutal efficiency. He presented the forged medical report, and Dr. Finch, who had taken a plea deal, testified about the $10,000 in cash. He presented the guardianship petition, highlighting Mark's signature. He presented the text message from Jessica, a clear act of intimidation. My neighbor George gave a powerful testimony about my character and clarity of mind. Their lawyer did his best. He tried to paint them as a desperate couple, crushed by debt, who made a terrible mistake. He called it a lapse in judgment, a family matter that spiraled out of control. Then the judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, turned her attention to them. She looked at Jessica. A lapse in judgment, Ms. Vance? You paid a doctor to fraudulently declare your mother-in-law mentally incompetent. You conspired to have her stripped of her rights and her property. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is a calculated act of profound cruelty. Then she turned to Mark. And you, sir? You stood by and let it happen. You signed the documents. You were a willing participant in a plan to defraud your own mother, the woman who raised you. There is no excuse for that. None. The judge called a brief recess before announcing the sentence. During the break, the courtroom emptied out, but Mark remained in his seat. He looked across the room at me, a broken man. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His face said it all. When Judge Miller returned, a heavy silence fell over the room. This court, she began, her voice ringing with authority, does not take kindly to the exploitation of our senior citizens. It is a betrayal of the most fundamental trust in a civilized society. She delivered the sentence. They avoided jail time, thanks to their lack of prior offenses and the DA's recommendation. But the punishment was still severe. Jessica was sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation, a $5,000 fine, and was ordered to complete 500 hours of community service, specifically, at a local senior center. Mark was given 1 year of probation, a $10,000 fine, and a permanent criminal record for conspiracy to commit fraud. That record would likely end any chance he had of salvaging his career. As the gavel fell, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom, I didn't feel a surge of victory. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. The war was finally over. The truth had been spoken and justice, in its slow, methodical way, had been served. Months melted into a full year. The seasons changed at Serenity Point. The vibrant greens of summer gave way to the fiery reds and golds of autumn, then the quiet white blanket of winter. My life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the rising sun and the crackling fire in the hearth. The house was no longer silent. It was peaceful. One of my first projects was to track down Jessica's brother, David. I didn't use a lawyer. I just called him. I explained who I was and what had happened to my husband's tools. To my surprise, the man was mortified. He said Jessica had told him I was clearing out the old man's junk. He drove 3 hours the very next day to return every last piece. He apologized profusely, his shame genuine. I thanked him, and in that small act of decency, a tiny bit of my faith in people was restored. I spent the winter in Robert's workshop, cleaning and oiling each of his beloved tools, the familiar weight of them in my hands a comforting presence. I wasn't just restoring wood and steel. I was restoring a connection to him, to us. I never answered Mark's letter. He never wrote another one. There were no more tearful phone calls, no more attempts at reconciliation. An unspoken understanding settled between us. The damage was too great. The trust was gone forever. I mourned the loss of my son as surely as I had mourned the loss of my husband. But I accepted it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. I reconnected with old friends. My neighbor George and I started a weekly chess game. I volunteered at the local library, reading stories to children. My life, which they had tried to shrink into a diagnosis on a piece of paper, began to expand again. I was not just a widow, not just a victim. I was Eleanor. Now sitting here on the porch Robert built, watching the sunlight dance on the lake, I feel a sense of peace I thought I had lost forever. This long, painful chapter is over. Thank you for listening to my story. This whole ordeal taught me a powerful lesson. It was never just about a house or about money. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about standing up and declaring that your life, your history, and your worth are not for someone else to take. Not even your own family. Age is not a weakness to be exploited. It's a fortress, built from a lifetime of experience and wisdom. I have a question for all of you. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to fight for your own dignity? To remind someone of your worth? If you feel comfortable sharing, please tell us about it in the comments below. Your stories matter. They give strength to others who might be facing their own battles right now. If my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. Let's remind the world, one story at a time, that we are stronger than they think.